Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing comes, nothing goes. There is no nothing. There is no something. Buddha nature means consciousness awareness. Zen koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Answer, mu. Mu means without. The absolute is without consciousness and is without awareness. Zen koan. What Buddha is beyond Buddha? Answer, not Buddha. Why? Because all perceivables and conceivables are Buddha or Buddha nature. Consciousness awareness. Who you are is without or not Buddha. The absolute is without awareness, consciousness, and states. Consciousness contains all perceivables and conceivables. All states of consciousness and experiences are holographic and contain all other states and all other experiences. That is why experiences and states are temporary. The experience of consciousness and awareness is just that. They are temporary experiences. The absolute is beyond or prior to experiences. Question: why is the knower so important? Answer: the knower is consciousness knowing itself. Ultimately, there is no knower, there is no consciousness, there is no awareness. Consciousness and awareness are phenomena. As Maharaj said, the absolute is prior to consciousness. The absolute has no awareness. The absolute has no consciousness. Consciousness and awareness are carriers of the dream illusion. Spirituality takes place in the dream only. There is no spirituality outside of the dream. Spirituality is part of the illusion and part of the mirage. See it all as a dream and have done with it. Nisargadatta Maharaj. All that is heard, or that is about to be read or heard, is non-existent. Shankara. Nisargadatta Maharaj. There is no birth, there is no death, there is no person. It's all a concept. It's all an illusion. Rays of the Absolute. Nisargadatta Maharaj, you are all rays of the Absolute. As Maharaj said, the Absolute is prior to consciousness. Question: can you discuss what does Nisargadatta Maharaj mean by rays of the Absolute? Rays of the Absolute is a term or a terminology that Maharaj used to describe what might be for a lot of people the last veil. In other words, when you get way, way, way out there, what you're going to have is the absolute nothingness. Prior to the absolute nothingness is the absolute. So the absolute nothingness, metaphorically, which is slightly forward of the absolute, from the absolute nothingness, there is a streaming, almost like a streaming or a projection or a trajectory that pours out of the absolute nothingness. That trajectory, that stream, that ray is a ray of the absolute. And that ray of the absolute forms consciousness and forms what you call you or yourself or I, or a psychological subject. Rays of the absolute is just that pure streaming of consciousness coming out of nothingness and appearing as somethingness. The important thing to appreciate in all of that is that to go beyond the ray of the absolute, to go beyond the absolute nothingness prior to it, there has to be a realization that even the absolute nothingness and the ray of the absolute nothingness, which you are, is still a concept. It's a picture. It's a description of what is. Prior to that picture, that concept, that representation, is the absolute. Prior to even the ray of the absolute, prior to the absolute nothingness from which the ray of the absolute appears. So that consciousness that streams out of the absolute nothingness is a descriptive representation of what is. It's a picture, it's a map. In order to realize the absolute, that picture, that map, that trajectory, that ray of the absolute of which you are, which is an extraordinary description, ultimately that has to be seen as a description of what is. Once that is realized as a description of what is, it too dissolves. The absolute is prior to consciousness, prior to rays of consciousness, prior to the absolute nothingness. Question: why is it that neti neti is so important? There are two basic styles of neti neti. My friends in London want me to say, and I will, neti neti. Discarding everything as not this, not this. Nisargadatta Maharaj would confront you. In other words, he would notice what state or station, what you were believing, what thought, memory, emotion, association, what lifestyle you were living, what archetype you were living. He would notice all of that, and what he would do through neti neti or neti neti, he would get you to discard not this, not this, because for him you were nesting in a particular state or station. There's a very famous Zen koan: you never want to nest in any state. So Maharaj was always trying to dislodge you from the state or station that you were residing in. The other style of neti neti was Madhyamika Buddhism, which is the 2nd century. It was founded by Nagarjuna. And basically what he did, rather than neti neti, what he would do is he would have you hold two concepts simultaneously. And by holding two concepts simultaneously, what would happen was they negated each other. For example, right now, if you held the concept, nothing is true, nothing is false, everything goes blank. Why does it go blank? Because you're holding two concepts simultaneously. Oftentimes, people confuse Madhyamika Buddhism, which is also known as middle way Buddhism, as moderate eating, moderate sleeping, moderate, everything moderate in moderation. It doesn't mean that. Nagarjuna was stressing holding two concepts simultaneously. Now, what is the purpose of that form of neti neti? The purpose of that is, if you say to me, is it all an illusion? And I say, yes, it's all an illusion. Then your mind will start tripping out. It's all an illusion. What does that mean? I thought everything was real. If I say, no, it's not all an illusion, it's real, then you immediately go, but it's real, and therefore I have to do this, and my life is about this, and what does it all mean, and what's the meaning or purpose? Nagarjuna was to hold those two concepts, nothing is real, nothing is not real, simultaneously. It's all an illusion. There is no illusion. The purpose was to disrupt the thought, memory, emotion, association, perception, disrupt the organization so that there was just blankness. Is there such a thing as free will? Their answer: there's no such thing as free will. There's no such thing as no free will. Together. The difference in styles was that Maharaj would definitely come at you and confront and try to dislodge you from any position that you were nesting in. Nagarjuna would have you hold both positions simultaneously. Maharaj coming at you so hard and so strong, the students realized, the devotees, the disciples realized that anything that stood in the way of me getting it was to be discarded as neti neti or neti neti, not this, not this. Maharaj had a beautiful quote, which was, I want to blast all your concepts and put you in the no concept state. Why to blast all concepts? Why neti neti or neti neti? Why? Because in the Shiva Sutras it says the cause of bondage is sound. Why? Because sound creates letters, letters create words, words create ideas and self-limiting concepts. The great philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said, "It's all a language game. Nothing exists outside of language." The problem is that we fuse with and think that we are the language. We think we are our thoughts, memories, emotions, associations, and perceptions. We think we are those constrictions. And since we think we are those constrictions and constructions, ergo, we feel limited, in quotes, by them. But there's nothing behind words. There's nothing behind thoughts. There's nothing behind them. Because prior to thoughts, memories, emotions, associations, perceptions, there's nothing there. It's all a language game. Now the question would be, why is it that language has such a grip on us? Why is it that words have such a grip on us? Somehow, the brain and nervous system has this extraordinary phenomena, which is because there's a word for something, we assume that thing actually exists. So if we say chair, the word chair actually exists. If we say happy, happy has to exist. If we say permanent, therefore permanent exists. If we say temporary, therefore temporary exists. All words by the brain and nervous system automatically assumes that they actually are. Now, to go even deeper into this, that includes words we assume that are true, that are pointers to the absolute. For example, we believe that consciousness actually exists. We believe that awareness actually exists. These are pointers. And what Maharaj said so beautifully is, all pointers point to what is not. The question to ask is there such a thing as consciousness prior to the word consciousness? Is there such a thing as awareness prior to the word awareness? To use Neti Neti or Neti Neti from Nisargadatta Maharaj, who you are is prior to consciousness. Who you are is prior to awareness. So because there's a word for something, we just assume that it exists. We have a tendency not to question it. We have a tendency to believe it and never to discard it. And that, of course, goes for the sense of I, me, and mine. Nisargadatta Maharaj's form of Neti Neti or Neti Neti was to give you a thorn to remove a thorn. So if I was stuck in a particular place, if I was nesting in a particular place, his thing was to unstick you, to dislodge you, to confront you. And he was very ferocious in that confrontation. So if you walked in eventually and he said, you're the I, hold on to the I am and let go of everything else. Okay, you walked in and said, okay, I'm the I am. I'm not my thoughts, memories, emotions, associations, and perceptions. He would say, no, 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 no. You're not the I am. You're the consciousness. So I have a belief of who I am. He gets me to move backward in quotes. And now I think I'm the I. Now I get that I'm the I am. Then as soon as I have it, thorn to remove a thorn, he takes the thorn away. He says, no, no, you're the consciousness. I'm the consciousness. I come back the next day and I said, I got it. I'm the consciousness. No, a thorn to remove a thorn. He would say, no, you're not the consciousness. Who you are is prior to consciousness. Oftentimes people misunderstand the book I Am That for that reason. S.K. Mulapatan, Maharaj's primary translator, told me that Maharaj really didn't like the book I Am That. He didn't like the book I Am That because people didn't realize that the answers to the questions he was giving was to a particular person in a particular moment in space-time who was stuck or nesting in a particular state or station. People began to take it on as a belief system. People began to take it on as biblical quotes like, thou shalt always be in the I am, or thou shalt always be earnest, or that shall always work harder, whatever it was. People got stuck into believing that. But actually, each answer he was giving to each questioner was for that questioner, where they were nesting in that moment in space-time, to dislodge them or move them beyond or prior to who they thought they were. So neti neti or neti neti is most essential part of Maharaj and his teachings. And more importantly, nowadays people teach Advaita. Advaita means not two. But until about 1990, people didn't teach Advaita. They taught Advaita Vedanta, Advaita hyphen Vedanta. There is an interrelationship between Advaita and Vedanta. Advaita, not two. Vedanta, neti neti or neti neti, not this, not this. Why? Because there is an interrelationship that goes back thousands of years. To negate the Vedanta or the neti neti side is to negate 50% of what's going on. Moreover, Advaita is oftentimes misunderstood to mean consciousness, awareness, non-duality. Advaita does not mean consciousness, awareness, or non-duality. Advaita means not two. Why? Because in order to have the experience of consciousness, it requires an experiencer, a knower, an awarer, a consciousness-er, a witness. Therefore, it's two. To say or to know or to experience, I'm the consciousness, requires two, the knower of consciousness and the consciousness itself. The experiencer of consciousness and the consciousness itself. Awareness, which is much more subtle than consciousness, still requires an awarer to be aware of awareness. Therefore, awareness is not Advaita. Consciousness is not Advaita. Advaita means not two. Some people have a tendency to assume, and this is linguistic, as mentioned earlier. In other words, because there's such a thing as consciousness, and because there's such a thing as awareness, therefore awareness and consciousness are the same thing. Awareness and consciousness are not the same thing. Consciousness and awareness is senior to consciousness. Itzhak Bentov, the author of Stalking the Wild Pendulum, postulated that every second there were 17 gaps or spaces. In other words, it was, you could see it, space, 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 17 times per second. But that the film moved so fast, like a film strip, it seemed to move so fast that it was one fluid motion. Maharaj used to say it was like a film strip. The old-time film strips, you would see a picture and then there'd be a space and you'd click it and see a picture and there'd be a space and you'd click it and see a picture and there's a space. The mind moved it so fast it was this one thing. The space is awareness. Consciousness appears on the awareness. This is why Maharaj said, you can have awareness without consciousness, but you cannot have consciousness without awareness. So the most basic takeaway from neti neti or neti neti, which is important to almost always be implanted in you. Again, Maharaj said, my words, if implanted in you, will destroy all other words and concepts, is anything you can know or know about, you can't be. Therefore, discard it. Anything you can know or know about, you cannot be. Therefore, discard it. All experiences, since there has to be an experiencer, you can't be it. Therefore, discard it. All perceivables, since there's a perceiver that's perceiving the perceivables, is not you, since the perception requires a perceiver. Therefore, it can't be you. Therefore, discard it. Neti neti or neti neti. Now, since as the consciousness, there's a consciousness-er that is conscious of the consciousness, then therefore I can't be the consciousness. Neti neti. Since there's awareness and there's an awarer that's aware of awareness, then I can't be awareness. Neti neti or neti neti. So the significance of neti neti or neti neti runs through all of thousands of years of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita-Vedanta. The two are intertwining and there's an interrelationship. You really can't have one without the other. And that's why neti neti is as significant as Advaita, not two. So for example, right now, if you notice any thought that you are having, be conscious of the thought. Notice what occurs when I say, what consciousness-er is conscious of a thought? Notice a feeling or a sensation that you're having. Be aware of the feeling or the sensation. Notice what occurs when I say, what awarer is awaring that? What awarer is awaring that? Everything goes blank. Why? Because who you are is prior to consciousness, prior to awareness, prior to the consciousness-er, and prior to the awarer. Spiritual traps, Nisargadatta Maharaj. I'm not interested if you are satisfied or you're pacified with your spiritual life. Do you know who you are? One of the greatest problems in spirituality, as well as psychology, is the guru or teacher, knowingly or unknowingly, giving misinformation. Question: what are the biggest traps in spirituality? Relatively speaking, the biggest, and by far and away the most important spiritual trap, is taking the mirage to be real. If you take the mirage to be real, if you take the illusion to be real, then all the other spiritual traps follow. The second spiritual trap, after you taking this to be real, is trying to make yourself into a better mirage, more purified, more embodied, more integrated, better, being able to do more, be more, have more, create more in your life. When you fall for the second spiritual trap, which is believing that it's real and then trying to make yourself into a better mirage, then you fall down the rabbit hole of trying to be more purified, more embodied, making yourself better. And the problem is that you try to be a better I, me, in this world. The Buddha said in the Diamond Sutra, quote, "There is no world," unquote. Nisargadatta Maharaj said, give up the tendency to improve yourself. So the problem is that you take on this spiritual idea called I am, and I am in this world, and the next thing you do, you're trying to improve yourself, you're trying to transform yourself, you're trying to make yourself better, and which leads to the third trap. The third trap is taking on a spiritual persona. Once you fall for number one, it's real. Number two, making myself better. Number three is, how do I make myself better? How do I make myself better? By generally taking on someone else's spiritual path and someone else's culture. For example, when I lived in India, I was in my 20s, and I began to take on another person's path. And I started to take on another person's culture. Swami Pranavananda said to me once that people come from the West and they take on the identity of Indian culture, thinking that that's somehow spiritual. Yogananda Paramahansa said, the spiritual ego is the most difficult to let go of. So you have spiritual, once you take on the spiritual ego, you have all the spiritual superego, the super shoulds, the spiritual persona of shoulds. I should always be caring. I should always be loving. I should always be kind. I should always be gentle. And what you find is this persona, it becomes like a mask. And when that persona and that mask take hold, and people kind of are always kind of that sweet saccharin. We call it saccharin because it's fake sugar. It's fake sugar or saccharin. It might taste good, but it's really, really bad for your health. Once you take on that, it leads to the fourth trap, which is integration. I am now going to integrate this into a brand new spiritual lifestyle. All of a sudden, I'm going to join a group. I'm going to join a community. I'm going to look a certain way. I'm going to talk a certain way. I'm going to act a certain way. The famous philosopher Michel Foucault said, the teacher decides what the discourse is going to be. What that means is, once you've taken trap number 1 on, it's real. Number 2, making yourself better. Number 3, taking on the persona. Now we have the fourth trap, which follows, which is now be part of a spiritual lifestyle. And the teacher determines what the discourse is going to be. What's the discourse? The discourse is what I'm supposed to feel, how I'm supposed to act, how I'm supposed to behave, how I'm supposed to sit, how am I supposed to be, do, and act in the context of life. And somehow, if I am able to do that, that is, in quotes, more spiritual. When you fall for all of these spiritual traps, and I'm talking relatively and metaphorically speaking, when you fall for all of these spiritual traps, it has a domino effect. And what gets lost or forgotten is not only finding out who you are, but also you forget the fact that spirituality is part of the illusion. Spirituality is part of the mirage. Even more importantly, the knower of the mirage, the awarer of the illusion, the consciousness of the illusion, the observer of the illusion, the witness of the illusion, are all part of the illusion. They're all part of the mirage. Question: is there such a thing as being done? What has to be appreciated is that self-development, self-improvement, personal growth is all one of and part of the spiritual traps. The important thing is you don't want to buy into the spiritual trap of constantly doing to get. The spiritual traps get you caught in awareness and consciousness and the concept that you will have to keep on being, doing, or having to be different in order to be done or get what they call doneness. What has to be appreciated is that space, time, consciousness, all of these are portals into the game. They're portals that when you fall down into believing those, you fall into the illusion of the game, the mirage. In the early 1970s, I was fortunate enough to take a 7-day retreat with Ram Dass. And Ram Dass had just gotten back from India. It was a silent retreat mostly, and we had a very strict schedule. In the morning, we would all meditate. About the 4th or the 5th day in, I'm sitting and I'm meditating. And this voice in my head, crystal clear voice, says, "It's a game." And it so startled me that I kind of woke up and looked around. I thought there was somebody who whispered it in my ear. It's a game. Spirituality is a game. And the portal into the game is consciousness, awareness, space, even the emptiness. If you fall into and start believing that, you'll fall into the game of spirituality, which is part of the illusion. Paradoxically, I love spiritual practice. I truly love it. It's an incredible activity. And paradoxically, as this is layered in several paradoxes, at the same time, there is no process that will get you from point A to point B. But I love spiritual practice. To me, it's an incredible joy to do spiritual practice. I love psycho-spiritual development. But the best way to see spiritual practice is this way, and this is very, very relatively speaking. Imagine you're in San Francisco and you want to drive from San Francisco to New York. Relatively speaking, if I get in my car, I look at my GPS, I look at my map, and I start to go from San Francisco to New York. Now, with the GPS, all of a sudden, I'll get like detours or road constructions, or maybe problems like with places where I have to get gasoline, or detours, or I have to go around, or what's the fastest, the best way, and all the obstructions that come along the way. Spiritual practice, very relatively speaking, is supposed to take all of these detours out of the way and make it, in quotes, more of a straight shot from San Francisco to New York. A guru or teacher, their job is to point out the detours, the distractions, the road construction signs. All of those obstacles have to be burned off or processed in order to get from San Francisco to New York. Now, of course, this is very, very relatively speaking. All of these paradoxes layered, loving spiritual practice, realizing simultaneously that they'll get you nowhere, at the same time, realizing that spiritual practice is the removal of these obstacles, if you will, real or imagined. And the job of the teacher is to remove these obstacles. That is their number one function, to force you to look at them, to make sure that you're not nesting in them. Don't fall down the rabbit hole of the empty space, down into the game. Misinformation. 17 counterintuitives. 1. You can trust your experiences. 2. You can trust your perceptions. 3. You can trust your thoughts, feelings, emotions, associations, sensations, and perceptions. 4. You can live your dream. Give up your dreams. If you imagine you can live your dreams, it means you're sleeping. 5. Believing there is something behind all of this. The mind imagines or assumes, decides, or believes. The operative words being imagines or assumes, decides, or believes. There is something behind all of this, when there is nothing behind all of this. 6. Imagining, assuming, deciding, or believing that there is a logic, an organization, a reason for what is, a cause of causes. 7. Believing that the desire to know how and why supports realization. Actually, it is the desire to know how and why which ensnares. 8. Believing for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, that things are balanced or balancing out. 9. Not appreciating that trying to change is resistance to what is. 10. Believing in cause and effect. 11. Believing there is a right and a wrong. 12. Believing there are reasons and explanations. Nobody knows why anybody does anything. Nobody knows why anything happens. 13. Believing you should transform bad into good. 14. Not appreciating existence requires resistance to an opposition. 15. Not appreciating that shock freezes the fluid motion of the picture, movie, or the film. Shock holds the universe solid. As an aside, and friendly advice, never make a decision while in a shock state. Never make a decision while in a shock state. Never make a decision While in a shock state. 16, believing that you exist in a specific location. 17, believing in the myth, I am one, I want to be many, or I am separate, I want to be one. Question. You mention in the second DVD, From Neti Neti, Nirvana Means Extinction, that there are paths and traps. What is a trap for a teacher? The biggest trap for a teacher is believing that they are a teacher. Once a teacher falls for that trap, they begin to develop also their own spiritual persona of how to be, do, act, and behave, which carries with it all sorts of standards. In the process of doing that, it's very easy to want to start building an awakening business. When I was a teenager in New York, they used to have a television show called Hollywood and the Stars. And all they would do in that show was interview Hollywood stars, and they would ask them questions. And Paul Newman was just beginning to start his peak into becoming the superstar. And they were interviewing him, and after he'd done several successful movies, they said he had taken several bad parts. And they said to him, why did you take these bad parts? And he said, I had to. He said, if I didn't do that, I would start to believe my own press clippings. Braulio Montalvo, who was my family therapy mentor back in the 80s, used to say, therapists can very easily start believing their own bullshit. And so the biggest trap for a teacher is all of a sudden believing they are a teacher with a mission and a purpose, and that somehow they were chosen maybe, or they're speaking to source or from source, and somehow that they are special or different than another. What's really important in all of this is, and probably the strongest question I used to get asked back in the 80s was, how do you know that you're in an identity? And the answer is, if you feel special or different from another person. So simply stated, the biggest trap for teachers is they fall in love with their own image. My father used to say to me, if you say it to yourself enough and say it to others enough, you'll start believing it. When I met Nisargadatta Maharaj, he looked at me and said, are you willing to stay 8 days and absorb the teachings? I didn't know I was in the spiritual game. I said, whatever Maharaj wants me to do, I'll do. He looked at me like, don't you understand? I don't play that game. I don't play the guru-disciple game. If you want to play that game, play it somewhere else. And it stunned me because about 20% of me knew it was a game, and about 80% of me thought it was real. Spirituality is a game. The guru and the disciple are both points or points to view in that game. You are neither the point or the point of view from. You are that. The guru and the disciple are 2 points of view or 2 points to view from in the game of spirituality. You're not the points to view from. You're not the teacher, you're not the student. You are that prior to consciousness. Question. You imply that the Absolute is an ever-present background. Doesn't that imply that it has presence? No. The experience of presence or the experience of the Absolute is just that. It's an experience. All experiences require an experiencer. So therefore, they can't or have nothing whatsoever to do with you. The experience of the Absolute is not the Absolute. The experience of presence is not the Absolute. The Absolute is not an experience. So the experience of presence is just that. It is an experience of presence. It has nothing whatsoever to do with who you are. The absolute is prior to the experiencer. The absolute is an ever-present background without any experiencer, knower, or awarer, or awareness, or consciousness. The absolute is not a state, and the absolute has no location. The absolute has no foreground, and the absolute has no background. Karma, nothing comes from nothing. Nisargadatta Maharaj, cause and effect are just a way of thinking about things. Nisargadatta Maharaj, there is no karma in the state of Parabrahma. As a very metaphoric picture, there's a movement, a vibration, a Shakti that comes out of the Absolute. That movement is karma. According to Nisargadatta Maharaj, karma means movement. So from that movement comes a vibration. Since the movement or karma comes out of the Absolute is prior to that movement. Therefore, karma or movement is impersonal. It's the movement which forms the vibration, which forms what you call you, the psychological subject, and the physical universe. Since the Absolute is prior to the movement, therefore there is no personal karma. Metaphorically, from the movement and the vibration and the Shakti comes the physical universe. This is why Baba Prakashananda used to say, Shakti is Maya. Shakti is part of the illusion. Why is Shakti Maya? Because from the vibration, from the Shakti forms or produces, in quotes, metaphorically, the entire physical universe and your psychological self, your position, your point of view, your location within a body-mind. All of that gets produced through this movement, vibration, Shakti. Who you are is a vibrational signature coming out of that. And therefore the Shakti, the movement, the vibration produces the, in quotes, experience of being. Therefore, since it is a vibration, the actual physical appearance that you see is a mirage, it's an illusion. Because if you trace it back far enough, and as Ramana Maharshi would say, go back the way you came, if you traced it back far enough, you would get to the Shakti, the energy, the vibration, and prior to that is the Absolute, prior to the vibration, prior to consciousness, and prior to awareness itself. The Absolute is beyond or prior to experiences. The experience of the Absolute is not the Absolute. Lakshmanju, whenever you perceive something, you perceive it from one level lower. Question: what is the difference between states and stations? And why is each one of the states you delineate so significant? So the question is, what is the difference between a state and a station? There really is no difference other than the fact that a station denotes more of like a train station. Like if I'm on a train, if I'm in San Francisco and I want to take a train all the way to New York, and let's say that train to New York is the Absolute. Okay. In between San Francisco and New York, there's going to be an incredible number of stations. So if I'm in San Francisco, the first station might be Salt Lake City. I don't want to get out at Salt Lake City because my goal is to get to San Francisco. The next station might be Denver. This is all very metaphoric, of course. I don't want to get out at Denver. I want to continue to New York. So what do I do next? A next station might be St. Louis. I don't get off at that station. I continue on. So one of the most important Zen sayings is, you never want to nest in any state. In other words, you never want to nest in any state or station because your, in quotes, goal, metaphorically, is to get from San Francisco to New York. One of the most important things in this is that a teacher or a guru has to notice where you are nesting. In what state or station are you nesting? And the job, in quotes, of the teacher or guru is to dislodge you. It is to move you. It is to get you to let go of that state or state that you're nesting in, a state or state that you do not know that you're nesting in, so that you can keep going along this train to get to the absolute. Now, one of the qualities of a teacher or guru, which is extremely important, is they need to be able to really notice where it is you are stuck, in quotes, and unstick you. Another beautiful Zen saying is, the doctor first has to be able to diagnose the disease before he can prescribe the medicine. So again, it's the job of the teacher to unstick you. If I believe I am in the I am, and that's who I am, the teacher has to make me aware, for example, that I'm the consciousness. If I believe that I am the consciousness and I'm experiencing that I'm the consciousness, the teacher needs to know that's a state or a station that I'm nesting in, so they can then move me, in quotes, beyond to prior to consciousness. Just to review from Advaita is Vedanta in the last YouTube video. The first state when I went to Maharaj was, as a thought goes by called I love myself, and I grab onto it and say it's me, or a thought goes by called I hate myself, and I grab onto it and I say that's me. And I said to Maharaj, how does that happen? What was his first move? His first move was to dislodge me or get me to let go of that position that I was holding in space-time. In other words, he said to me, who is the knower? Or what knower is knowing that? By doing that, he moved me further away, and all of a sudden I noticed there was a thought, and I was the observer of the thought, so it was thought, space, thought, space, thought, space. And I noticed there was a space between two thoughts. So I went from the state or station called I love myself or I hate myself. All of a sudden I'm the observer that's observing the thoughts, and all of a sudden I'm observing them as spaces between two thoughts. Soon Maharaj said, stay in the I am, let go of everything else. All of a sudden I let go of that, and there was just the I am. I just was. I wasn't my thoughts, memories, emotions, associations, perceptions. I wasn't the space. I wasn't the observer. I was just the I am. But soon I realized that I was conscious of being in the I am. When the of melted, I moved back another state or station into just, I was the consciousness. Soon, all of a sudden, there was a knower or a consciousnesser that was conscious of the consciousness. When that happened, all of a sudden, there was a huge expansion. Why? Because any state or station has a boundary and a limitation to it, and you're experiencing that state or station as who you are. When you let go of when the consciousness dissolves or it disappears, or you let go of it, all of a sudden this vast emptiness which appears to go on forever. But soon you realize, even as the witness, or what's called the supreme witness, that too is a state or station. Once you realize that, you realize that within or fused with this absolute nothingness is awareness. Awareness is fused in and part of this absolute nothingness. This absolute nothingness with the awareness are both very, very, very subtle states or stations that have nothing to do with who you are. And when that finally dissolves, you're the absolute. The absolute prior to consciousness, prior to awareness, prior to the absolute nothingness. Once you realize that, you can appreciate why Maharaj said, in the absolute state, I don't even know that I am, and why he referred to it as unawareness. The Buddha said it beautifully when he said, you might not necessarily be aware of your own enlightenment. Gurus and teachers. Relatively speaking, there are three problems in spirituality as well as psychology. First, the guru or teacher, knowingly or unknowingly, gives misinformation. Second, the guru or the teacher keeping people around that do not belong there, or the teacher allowing people to stay too long. And three, putting too much emphasis on experiences. Question. In spirituality, they always talk about the heart, and sometimes when I read Nisargadatta Maharaj, Advaita seems to have little heart. The first part of the question. Maharaj was very, very unique. He was like a cosmic force. He was incredibly ferocious, incredibly up in your face, and very, very confrontational. The beauty of that is, before I met Maharaj, most teachers and gurus I spent time with were very gentle and they were very kind and all of that, but they never really confronted directly the state or station that I was nesting in. Maharaj was really in your face about it. And what it did is it forced you to look at what came up for you, and it forced you to look at where you were stuck and you did not know you were stuck. I've often said that if Maharaj was alive today, and in California particularly, he would not be that popular. The second part of the question is about heart. In Sanskrit, heart is called Hridaya. Hridaya is the absolute nothingness, the no-state state prior to consciousness, and that from which the consciousness arises from and subsides back into. Ramana Maharshi called the place where the primal I thought arises. Ramana would say, search from where the primal I thought arose. Nisargadatta Maharaj said, the I am is nothingness. From the nothingness, the I am appears. The absolute nothingness, prior to consciousness, is the spiritual heart. It had been months that I had not seen Baba Prakashananda, and I was suffering terribly. And all of a sudden one day he appeared in Ganesh Puri where I was living. So I went up to see him, and my spiritual name was Narayan. So I went up to see him, and I just put my head in his lap, and I was crying. And he just started rubbing my head and going, Narayan, 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 Narayan. And I said, I missed you. And he looked at me with so much love. And he said, me and you have met in the heart. There is no missing. And somehow I could have taken that to mean the heart and the love, and we met in the love and so on. But it was much, much, much deeper than that. He was saying, me and you have met in the absolute nothingness, prior to the I am, prior to consciousness, the spiritual heart. And there is no missing. Question. All of the Advaita teachers always seem to say, there's no I, there's no I, there's no I. The first thing I would have to ask them is, who do I make the check out to? When some Advaita teachers have come to my talks and started doing the no I, there's no I, there's no I, and playing the no I card, what I often say to them is, how do you know that? Or what knower is knowing that there's no I? Because if there's a knower knowing there's no I, the most you can say is they are in a not I state or station. In other words, there's no I, but I know, or I'm the knower of the fact that there is no I. Or you could say they are in a no self or no I identity. Even the state of witnessing. still is a witnessing state or station, a witnessing identity. Question. I've been with a guru who is yelling and almost abusive. Why is there such a cracked or broken or smashed or even shattered feeling that I have when I meet and get confronted by him? The feeling of being cracked or smashed or broken or confronted or cracked, all of those types of feelings are psycho-emotional manifested samskaras. The second thing that you have to appreciate is that a guru, a real guru like Nisargadatta Maharaj, was a cosmic force. And that cosmic force shattered all thoughts, memories, emotions, associations, perceptions, understanding, states, station, archetypes, whatever you were nesting in. The best way to imagine it is, imagine you were living in a glass jar. And let's imagine that you didn't know you were living in a glass jar. The guru comes along and smashes the glass jar. And when he smashes the glass jar, you feel shattered or cracked. So it's really not a destructive force coming from Nisargadatta, or from any teacher for that matter. It's a liberating force. Now, from the point of view of being the shattered, at least initially, it feels shattering and painful and smashed and all of this kind of words. But from the point of view of the cosmic force, there's a no experience. There's just a ray or trajectory, a force emanating from the absolute nothingness, which smashes all thoughts, memories, emotions, associations, perceptions, spaces, the observer, even the state of consciousness, which is so oftentimes unknowingly being nested in. The path in spiritual practice. All spiritual paths are models of how to. All spiritual paths are models of how to get from an imagined point A to an imagined or desired point B. Krishnamurti, truth is a pathless land. Question. I and so many friends of mine were given a spiritual practice, and sometimes it gave me something, and other times they did not work at all. Can you say something about that? This is a very, very long, very, very complicated question. And as you probably know, there have been volumes upon volumes upon volumes of material over thousands of years just written on that question. So to attempt to answer it in a short context, I just want to be clear, would leave an incredible amount out. To even begin to first answer this, if we look at Zen, I think it's a great way of looking at it. Zen has a teaching master and a master, and there's clearly a difference. A master is a master with no teaching function. A teacher is a master with a teaching function. The important thing to realize is that a Zen master and a Zen teaching master are two completely different things. The teaching master can look at you, spend some time with you, and diagnose, in quotes, or realize or appreciate or understand where it is you are, and then give you the appropriate practice to move you beyond where you are. What I think is most important to realize is that a spiritual practice is given to a specific person for a specific period of time to perform a specific function. And once that function is done, then the practice needs to be taken away. So for example, if I'm in a thought or an obsessive thought about something, I might get one practice for a particular period of time for a particular function to deal with that, and then the practice is taken away. If I'm in a very intense feeling state like anger or fear or something like that, a different practice is given to me specifically to perform a particular function for a particular period of time, but only again for a particular person. So therefore, spiritual practice has to be monitored very, very closely by the teaching master. If you let someone go too long in the practice and continue to do it, what happens is it's almost like the grooves of the mind get more and more and more iterated and more deeper. And what happens often is that the student or the practitioner or the devotee, what happens is they just become more fundamentalist, more rigid, more like missionaries trying to have a mission or a purpose. And the function of it or the functionality is lost. The other problem is that oftentimes gurus or teachers will give a blanket one-size-fits-all spirituality. In other words, a spiritual practice is not tailor-made for you for a specific period of time, function, etc. Rather, the spiritual practice is given to everyone gets the same mantra. Everyone gets the same yantra. Everyone gets the same tantra. And so what happens then is, for most people, those mantras, yantras, tantras, spiritual practices don't fit. So then what happened to me, for example, was I was trying to fit in to somebody else's path. This is going back to what Krishna had said, which was, it is better to do your own path imperfectly than do another's perfectly. He even used the word dangerous. So again, rather than taking on somebody else's system and you trying to fit into it, it's the job of the guru or the teaching master to get the exact right technology, the process, the mantra, yantra, tantra that fits absolutely perfect for you, which might be different for me, which might be slightly different to somebody else, and then to monitor them very closely so you know when to take the practice away. Another part of the spiritual practice which needs to be kind of looked at from another level is the word effort. A student went to Maharaj and said, should I effort at my sadhana, spiritual practice? Maharaj said, yes, one should effort and effort and effort at their practice. Then and only then will they realize that effort will get them nowhere. This is very important. Effort is something that you don't want to apply necessarily. If the right spiritual practice, like a hand in glove, is a perfect fit, like homeopathy, if the guru's gets your vibration and can match that vibration perfectly with the appropriate practice for you for a particular period of time to perform a particular function, then that vibration, we could say, gets neutralized. But that vibration must fit absolutely perfectly. The question would be, how do you know it's going to fit you perfectly? How do you know if it fits perfectly? Because it goes into you almost like a virus. And when it goes into you almost like a virus, the practice actually does itself. It feels effortless. It's just happening. I know for me, being given so many different mantras over such a long period of time, oftentimes now I will just sit and a mantra will appear or not, and the mantra does itself. The mantra just does itself. Now, paradoxically, the question often emerges, should I just do the practice? Will you just do the practice, you do the practice, you do the practice, you do the practice? Maharaj called this just planting seeds. You do the practice, plant seeds, you do the practice, plant seeds. And years later, all of a sudden, the seeds sprout and bear fruit. And all of a sudden, the mantra, yantra, tantra just kind of spontaneously does itself. But the key thing is that it will only occur like that if the vibrational technology, the vibrational approach, the mantra, yantra, tantra, whatever it is that's being done, it has to match perfectly, like in homeopathy, the exact vibration of the aspirant, of the spiritual seeker, of the practitioner. When it does, then the process unravels itself effortlessly. and the vibration neutralizes, and all of a sudden, you're in the absolute nothingness. It just all disappears. Consciousness is whole and contains all perceivables and conceivables. All states of consciousness are experiences and are holographic and therefore contain all other states and experiences. This is why experiences keep coming back. Even the experience of consciousness and awareness is just that. They are experiences. The Absolute is beyond, or prior to, or without experiences. Even the very subtle no-experience experience is a subtle perception and is part of the illusion and needs to be discarded. There are an infinite number of experiences, but infinity is a concept which appears to exist within the dream only. Ultimately, there is no such thing as infinity. Infinity is just a concept or an idea. Question: I have so many experiences, but they never last. Experiences never last. All experiences, no matter high, low, good, bad, right, wrong, spiritual, unspiritual, all experiences are temporary and are not you. They contain an experiencer, which is experiencing them. Who you are is prior to or beyond experiences. Baba Prakashananda, once I asked him about experiences, and he said, if I tell you my experience, I'll think I had it. Experiences are ego. So the next question that would appear out of that is, when Bala Prakashananda says experiences are ego, what is ego? Ego is I, fill in the blank. I love myself, I hate myself, I'm experiencing the void, I'm experiencing the nothingness, I'm experiencing pure love, I'm experiencing the witnessing, I'm in witnessing consciousness. I am having an experience. There's an experiencer there, a knower there, an awarer there, an observer there, something that's reporting the experience. That's why Baba Prakashananda said, if I tell you my experiences, I'll think I actually had them. In other words, who you are is prior to experiences and prior to the experiencer. Question: what then is the body? The body is a perception. The body is a vibration. If you trace it back prior to the perceiver, what you begin to realize that the body is a vibrational frequency appearing in consciousness. There actually is no I, me, or mine. There's just a vibration which appears, and in its resonance, there's this feeling sense of I, me, or mine. Imagine a violin string or something. If you pluck the string, the sound would be I, me, or mine. It would be your vibrational signature, so to speak. In the same way, the sound, the string, the frequency, the vibration produces what you call you and a psychological substance. And the feeling that I am in the body. That is all about vibrational frequency. In the 1970s, there was a book I spent so much time with by Swami Venkateshananda called The Yoga Vashishta. It was a beautiful 2-volume set. And in it, one of the, in quotes, meditations was to find the I in the body. And even as you listen to this, if you look for and try to find the I in the body, you realize there is no I in the body. That the I and the body is just not there. There is no I in the body. So again, the body, which you call the person, which you call you, let alone all your psycho-emotional, some manifested, some scars, are of all vibrational frequencies which occur through the movement karma, which is not personal. So there's a movement which produces a vibrational frequency, and the resonance of that vibrational frequency forms what you call you in the body mind. But there is no personal karma, because who you are, or who you think you are, never even arose until the movement. Prior to the movement, prior to that movement which forms the vibration, is only the absolute nothingness. And prior to that is the absolute. Archetypes, archetypical stories, are anthropomorphic superimpositions which are projected onto the absolute. Archetypes, archetypical stories, are descriptive representations manufactured by a brain and nervous system which aid in the brain's desire to categorize, understand, feel and control, and survive. The manufacturing of archetypes, archetypical stories, are superficial and primitive tendencies to try to understand and control that which is not understandable or controllable. Nobody knows why anybody does anything. Nobody knows why anything that happens, happens. Archetypes, archetypical stories, are descriptive representations of things which do not exist. To use archetypes or archetypical stories to explain actions or behavior reinforces the localized narcissistic tendency to believe that you are, and that you understand, and that you are in control. Archetypical stories are mirages. That is why understanding them yields no satisfaction. It's like trying to drink water out of a mirage in the desert. Question. The Enneagram has 9 basic personality types. You in the last YouTube talk about manifested psycho-emotional samskaras. Are there more than 40 manifested psycho-emotional samskaras? Before I even begin talking about the Enneagram and the Enneagram types, first thing I want to do is to acknowledge Oscar Ichazo. Oscar Ichazo is the father of the modern-day Enneagram, and if it was not for his brilliance, there wouldn't even be a modern-day Enneagram. Now, regarding the psycho-emotional manifested samskaras, I came up with approximately 40 of them. How many of them there are, I actually don't know. It's actually a work in process. In my last workshop, I asked the students in the workshop to notice if there were any other ones that I didn't see, because I'm very limited by my track, my ray, my trajectory, or what I have in front of me. So I will only see what's on my track, ray, or trajectory. In the last workshop, I asked the students to come up with, or to notice if there were any samskaras that they came up with that I might not have seen. One of them was called Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web just meant I'm an outsider and I'm trying to fit in so that I can connect or relate to people or get love or connection or feel one with the group. This all can be related also to Enneagram number 6 and Enneagram number 9. Other possible manifested psycho-emotional samskaras are, I have to give myself up and do what you want, or you will leave me. Or, I have to connect and right all the wrongs. The survival mechanism, which has the strong pull of integration and the logical and powerful desire to integrate, embody, and be here now, could be part of the spiritual trap of integration and having a spiritual community and lifestyle. This survival mechanism and spiritual trap could be linked to the manifested psychological samskara of Charlotte's Web. In other words, I am on the outside, or am an outsider, or I don't fit in. And the solution? I have to do or change or transform or be different in order to fit in and be fully accepted and survive. Question. In your early books, you talked about the false core, and in your last YouTube, you talked about manifested psychological samskaras. Are there other more subtle manifested samskaras than psychological or emotional samskaras? In the last YouTube, we focused more on the manifested psycho-emotional samskaras because they were just more up in your face. But basically, samskaras are, it starts off with a movement, which we called karma. Karma means movement. There's a movement which forms the vibration, and each part of the vibration forms a manifested samskara. They manifest it in so many ways, and the entire physical universe and all that you call you is a samskara. In other words, you could say that everything is a samskara, in that everything originates as a movement, karma, which forms a vibration, and the resonance of that vibration forms the physical universe and what you call you or I. So samskaras are vibrational in nature, and the resonance of the frequency from the vibration of the samskara, the vibration, form what you call you in the physical universe. Another more subtle level is the archetypical manifested vibrational samskaras. These are a little bit more difficult to pin down because they are more lifestyle. For example, in the world of spirituality, you have the seeker after truth, the guru, the teacher, or the disciple, or the yogi, or the monk, or the swami. All of these are a little bit more difficult to see through for two reasons. First, they're a lifestyle, and you're actually living them rather than like a psycho-emotional state that pops up. And second is the lifestyle of a spiritual lifestyle or a spiritual archetypical lifestyle has an awful lot of agreement from people in the world. Everybody assumes that this lifestyle is real and it's not a vibration. So therefore, they're a little bit more difficult to isolate and pin down. But once you realize that the teacher, the student, the doctor, the lawyer, the married with 3.2 children, all of that is a lifestyle samskara, an archetypical lifestyle samskara. Why? Because it begins as a vibration, and as a vibration, prior to the vibration is a movement. So that movement we call karma, impersonal, forms the vibration, which has a resonance, which forms the lifestyle, which we term archetypes, which eventually become psycho-emotional manifested samskaras. Even more subtle than the vibrational, archetypical, spiritual samskaras, or the vibrational veils of consciousness. When we talk about vibrational veils of consciousness as samskaras, we're talking about all the states and stations. That includes observation, that includes the space between two thoughts, that includes the I am, the consciousness, the knower of the consciousness, the witness, the emptiness, the experiencer that's having all experiences, the perceiver of the illusion. All of those, including the absolute nothingness, even the trajectory, the ray of the absolute, are all vibrational samskaras. Why? Because they all originate, in quotes, with the absolute, and the movement karma, which forms the vibration, and all states and stations, no matter pleasant or unpleasant, spiritual or mundane, are resonances of that particular vibration. Therefore, not only is manifested psychological samskaras impersonal, not only is karma impersonal, all states or stations that an I, a me, or a mind that you might find yourself in, or any psychological subject might find themselves in, always, if you trace it back, go back to the resonance, go back to the vibration, which brings you back to the movement, impersonal movement, which ultimately brings you back to the absolute. This is why the incredibly beautiful, simple teaching of Ramana Maharshi is so incredible. When he said, go back the way you came. There's the trace the I thought. Go back the way you came. I hate myself or I love myself. Manifested samskara. The observer. The spaces between two thoughts. Go back. The I am. Tracing. The consciousness prior to the knower of consciousness. The awarer of consciousness. Back the way you came to the witness. There's the emptiness, the witness of the emptiness. Anything I can know or know about, says Nisargadatta Maharaj, I can't be. Therefore, discard it, tracing backwards until eventually there's just the vibration prior to an I. Then tracing back even further, there's just the movement. Then even further, you have awareness, which is contained in the absolute nothingness. Even awareness itself is a veil of consciousness. The absolute nothingness prior to awareness, a veil of consciousness. So Ramana's go back the way you came was saying, go back through all of these layers, veils, vibrations, samskaras, back even to the movement. And prior to the movement, prior to the absolute nothingness, all of those veils, states, and stations is the absolute. Prior to movement, prior to the absolute nothingness. So if you could take away one thing that Maharaj said and Ramana Maharshi said, Ramana Maharshi is saying, go back the way you came. Maharaj is saying, anything you can know or know about, you can't be. Therefore, discard it. Why can you not be it? Because the absolute has no awareness. The absolute has no consciousness. The absolute has no knowingness. The absolute has no experiencer. Therefore, no experiences. Therefore, everything originates, in quote, as a movement and a vibration which forms the physical universe and all that you think that you are. And what's even more paradoxical is, as the absolute, there is no absolute. As the absolute, there is no absolute. The apparent teachings, all that is heard, or that is about to be read or heard, is non-existent. Shankara. Question. Okay, I accept this is all an illusion. How is this going to help me in my life and relationships? Believing that upon realization somehow, and getting that it's all an illusion, that somehow it's going to help you in your life or in your relationships, is a complete distortion of spirituality. Spirituality is about finding out who you are. Now, when you say, okay, I accept it's all an illusion, but the problem is that, yes, it's all an illusion, but what isn't included is the knower of the illusion, the awarer of the illusion, the witness of the illusion is part of the illusion. When they said to Nisargadatta, who are you? He replied, nothing perceivable or conceivable. If you can perceive it or conceive it, it's not you. Therefore, discard it. The significance of that is not only perceive it and conceive it, this physical universe or my relationships or my health or whatever it is, also I can perceive and conceive the knower, the awarer, I can be aware of being aware, the consciousnesser, I can be conscious of consciousness, the witness, I can know or know about the witness. Therefore, all of them are part of the illusion. Part of the problem is that we assume that somehow if I realize and find out who I am, I'll be able to be more, do more, have more, create more. I'll be omniscient. I'll always pick the right stock. I'll always pick the right relationships. I'll never make a mistake. I'll always be kind and loving and all of these types of things. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. It's all an illusion. When Maharaj said to me, there is no birth, there is no death, there is no person, it's all a concept, it's all an illusion. He didn't say to me, it's all an illusion, except he said it's all an illusion. The knower of the mirage is part of the mirage. That's why you are a mirage that doesn't know you're a mirage. Knowledge is bondage, the Shiva Sutras. Very metaphorically, any knowledge, sound, coming from vibrations metaphorically is one step forward from the vibration itself. The resonance is one step forward from the movement the string makes. For example, the sound the violin string makes when plucked is 2 steps forward from the movement karma of the string. The sound, knowledge resonance, the violin string makes when plucked is 3 steps forward from the absolute nothingness, the string itself. And the sound is 4 steps forward from the absolute, the violin. In this manner, the absolute is the violin. The absolute nothingness is the string. The movement of the string is the karma. The vibration which is produced is the resonance. The sound is the knowledge. Question. In the last YouTube, lying was so emphasized. Why? And why is lying such an issue? And what exactly do you mean by lying? Lying is so important because most people confuse lying with intentions. In other words, I didn't have bad intentions, my intentions are good, therefore I'm not lying. All lying starts with lying to oneself. And basically it originates, if you will, or underneath it, is a desire to be seen a certain way, a desire to misrepresent, or to pretend, or to look, or be seen a certain way, or to see yourself a certain way. Lord Krishna says so beautifully, all is clouded by desire. Like smoke hides fire, like dust hides a mirror. So when you are lying, it is because you have a desire to be seen or to see yourself a certain way. But like dust hides a mirror, you can't see yourself. You can't see yourself clearly because of the desire. So lying has nothing whatsoever to do with your alleged intentions. Lying originates with desire, and all is clouded by desire. The second piece about lying, which is incredibly important, is every time you lie or misrepresent or pretend, you add another layer. The question often arises is, why is it that you always say that telling the truth things disappear, but lies persist and get more solidified? Because every time you lie to yourself or pretend or misrepresent, what happens is you add another layer and things become more solid. When you tell the truth, things begin to dissolve or disappear. Now, the word desire is an extraordinary word because the Lord Buddha said in his second noble truth, the cause of suffering is desire. If we look at the word desire, what is it really? Desire can be defined as primal movement. So karma, movement, and desire, primal movement, the most basic movement. This is why yogis cannot get rid of desires. They always come back. I try to get rid of a desire, it comes back. Desires are bad, desires come back. But when you realize what is desire? Desire is a primal movement which forms the vibration, which forms the resonance, which forms the I, which goes, I have this desire. But actually it, in quotes, originates in the primal movement. In this way, you could see how Buddha's second noble truth, the cause of suffering is desire, and the word karma, where they come together incredibly so. They all are primal movement. One of the most beautiful quotes that Nisargadatta Maharaj had was, "There is no movement in the state of Parabrahman." And what is Parabrahman? Brahman is consciousness. Brahman is awareness. Parabrahman is beyond consciousness. Parabrahman is beyond awareness. So there is no movement or activity, which Maharaj also referred to as stirring, in the state of Parabrahman. Why? Because it's prior to the primal movement called karma, called desire. Question. On your recent YouTube video, you talk about bliss being a sheath or a covering. What about Satchidananda that is always professed? Satchidananda obviously has to be a vibration. It originates, in quotes, in the movement. The movement forms the vibration, which forms a state called Satchidananda. That's why if you notice, if you take workshops or if you meditate, you might go into a state called Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. And you go, that's bliss, that's incredible, but it always disappears. If I were to pluck a string of a violin, you'd have a sound, a resonance and a sound, and then eventually the sound would diminish and it would disappear. Satchidananda is a description of a resonance, a pleasant resonance, from a vibrational state. All states are samskaras. All states are vibrations. So Satchidananda is a state. So forgive the language when I say this and how it's organized. It's hard to talk about it in language. But Satchidananda, the experience of Satchidananda as a vibrational resonance, can be viewed from the absolute nothingness. It almost appears like a vibration appearing in awareness that the absolute nothingness can view. But you'll notice that the Satchidananda is awareness dependent. In other words, you have the absolute nothingness. Contained and coming out of the absolute nothingness is awareness. Within the awareness appears the state covering, a pleasant state or covering, called Satchidananda or bliss, as a vibration, which ultimately dissipates, and all you have is the awareness. And when the awareness dissipates, you only have the absolute nothingness with knower or awarer to view or to know about it. The reason it's a sheath or covering, like awareness is a sheath or covering, or like consciousness is a sheath or covering, or the witness is a sheath or a covering. Why? Because if you lock into any particular state or station, they are vibrational resonances, and as such, you immediately freeze and become that state or station. The reason it's important, in quotes, to notice all these sheaths and states and stations and samskaras and all that, because then there's a less likelihood of you nesting in any state, whether the state be consciousness, whether the state be witnessing, whether the state be awareness, whether the state be emptiness, where you're stuck in emptiness, whether the state be a vibration. That is the only reason to notice all of these states and stations, all these vibrations, all these resonances, all these coverings. If you can identify them and all of a sudden they dissolved and you realize who you are is prior to or beyond any state, station, resonance, or vibrational frequency. Question. I have watched all your DVDs, and in the second DVD, Nirvana Means Extinction, you propose post-deconstruction and oftentimes use science, which is hard for me to relate to. Why use science? I used science in post-deconstruction as a metaphor, the operative word being metaphor. Basically, Nisargadatta Maharaj, with me, for some reason, always was using scientific metaphors. For example, fluids come together and the I Am appears, or there is no location, or there is no cause and effect. all those types of things that he would say to me were using devices. So scientific metaphors were used, Maharaj used with me, and one other person that I've heard about, as a device, a technique, a lever, a way to get me to unnest from a state or station that I was sitting in. In the late 1970s, I read the most beautiful masterpiece by Fritjof Capra called The Tao of Physics. And I think it's one of the great masterpieces of the late second half of the 20th century because it really started the whole new wave of the new physics. So Maharaj used those metaphors as a device or a way to unstick you. So rather than say there's no such thing as location or there's no such thing, fluids come together and the I am appears, like he said to me, he basically was trying to use devices to get me to see, in the first case, fluids come together and the I am appears, that the I arises after the action and event occur. In other words, in yoga language, they might just say, you're not the doer. To say there's no location, that you don't exist in any particular location or space of time, what is he really talking about? He's talking about Bell's theorem. For him to say that to me didn't really work. What he had to do was to say it to me and plant, almost like a virus, that inquiry. And when I came home and began to read all the quantum physics, somehow it dislodged or removed the whole issue of non-locality, or revealed the whole issue of non-locality. Oftentimes it's said, well, where do these things meet, science and spirituality? They only meet in non-locality. Niels Bohr, who is a founder of quantum physics, said if you're talking about quantum physics, you're talking about non-locality. So non-locality, everything is based on location in space-time. If I have no location in space-time, then who or what or where am I? The whole concept of where, not only who disappears, but where. If I have no location, then not only am I not, but I also have no location to be in. So non-locality is a pivotal issue as far as using a scientific word or phrase or understanding in the world of deconstruction or post-deconstruction or realizing who you're not, or as Maharaj said, in order to find out who you are, you first have to find out who you're not. Who are you not? You're nothing perceivable or conceivable. Since you're nothing perceivable and you're nothing conceivable, you can't possibly have a location. Getting back to the initial question is, science, what is science? Science originates, in quotes, with a vibration. Prior to the vibration is a movement, karma. So the movement forms the vibration, and science is part of the vibrational resonance, which forms consciousness and what we call the perceivable and conceivable universe. Science, therefore, can best be appreciated as a thorn to remove a thorn. In other words, you can use a concept like science, non-locality, no space-time, the I arises after the action or event, or the neurology where you say that fluids come together and the I am appears. All of that is a thorn to remove a thorn, to push you, in quotes, back the way you came. Science is a resonance. Science is a vibrational frequency appearing out of the consciousness and is only a thorn to remove a thorn. And as with all thorns to remove a thorn, as soon as a thorn is out of your foot, called location, called doership, called I am the body, called location in space-time, as soon as that thorn is removed, and you start moving back the way you came prior to, into vibration, into movement, and prior to that, the thorn has to be thrown away. So a thorn to remove a thorn means science is a thorn to remove a thorn, a device, which eventually has to be thrown away. The phenomena of consciousness and awareness. Consciousness and awareness are both phenomenological appearances. The absolute, who you are, is beyond or without consciousness and awareness. Question: what is the difference Or is there a difference between consciousness and awareness? Question. I keep hearing that if you look at your experience, you will notice that awareness or consciousness has two qualities, one being aware and the other being present. Could you explain this further? As we mentioned earlier, the difference between consciousness and awareness is that, as Itzhak Bentov said in Stalking the Wild Pendulum, there are 17 little tiny gaps between each second. The consciousness appears out of that gap. The awareness is that from which the consciousness appears from. To say that consciousness is always conscious or aware or present, or to say that awareness is always aware and always present, is actually taking on and looking at awareness or consciousness from a position or a point of view. So consciousness appears on awareness. Awareness is the gap from which consciousness arises or consciousness appears. To say that consciousness is always conscious or awareness is always aware and present requires a superimposition. In other words, it's a point of view, an awarer, a consciousnesser, or an experiencer superimposing that quality called present, awareness, always aware, consciousness on the absolute nothingness, which is prior to awareness itself. The absolute nothingness actually contains and holds the awareness. The absolute nothingness contains and holds the awareness. This is why the absolute in the Upanishads, it would say, quote, the absolute is beyond all form and beyond all attributes. Presence, awareness, consciousness, being present, always being aware, is an attribute that is superimposed on the absolute nothingness. So in this way, the experience of presence is a resonance or a vibration that originates, in quotes, from the movement which forms the vibration, which forms what you call the experience of presence. To say, I am aware, or are you aware, or I am presence, or it is presence, always requires an I, an experiencer, a knower, a wearer, a consciousnesser. That's why Maharaj always stressed that the absolute is prior to awareness and prior to consciousness. Many teachers talk about experience and my experience, and that experiences are real. Then they claim there is only one consciousness. I'm completely confused. Your experience is your experience, and it is an experience requiring an experiencer or a knower to know about or be aware of the experience. When you have an experience of, in quotes, the world, you're talking about an experience of the experience of the world. Both the experience of the world and the experiencer of the world are like an ongoing loop which reinforce one another. Who you are is prior to experience. What's interesting is that the experiencer requires an of, something to be experienced, and a world to experience. The Buddha in the Diamond Sutra says, there is no world. Maharaj said, the first step is realizing I'm nothing. The second is to realize I'm everything. But both of those hang on the idea and the concept that there is a world. Not only is there no world, the Buddha, there also is no inner world. There's no being in the body. So there's no outer world, there's no inner world. Who you are is beyond or prior to the experiencer or the perceiver or the knower of not only the world, but your world, both in quotes inner and in quotes outer. Question. You say consciousness is part of the illusion, yet you quote in the book Rays of the Absolute from the Yoga Vishishta, quote, everything is consciousness, nothing exists outside of consciousness. Isn't this a contradiction? Yes and no. From one point of view, from one nesting state or state, you could say everything is consciousness, nothing exists outside of consciousness. Another way of interpreting that is that everything that's perceivable or conceivable or that appears to exist is made of consciousness, and nothing that is perceivable or conceivable exists outside of consciousness. But once again, Maharaj stressed, who you are is prior to or without consciousness. Question: if I am prior to consciousness, then what is the spanda of Tantric Yoga and Kashmir Shaivism? Spanda means the pulsation or the throb. So the pulsation or the throb. So something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing. The nothing becomes something. The something becomes nothing. Something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing. Spanda means that pulsation, something becoming nothing, and nothing becoming something. Never-ending, beginningless, without the concept of beginning, without the concept of end. The subtle awareness or perception or knowingness or witnessing of the spanda, which is a very, very, very subtle pulsation and veil. Nothing, the world appears, something. Something, the world disappears, nothing. Nothing, something, something, nothing. That subtle awareness, that subtle perception, that subtle noticing, that subtle witnessing is the spanda, is the pulsation. So spanda, that something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, that ongoing, beginningless, endless process still requires a knower or something to know or know about it. You could say that the state or station of that pulsation, of that spanda, is the illusion at its most subtle. Something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing. The question often emerges, what drives this movement, this something, nothing, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest? Maharaj talked about the love to be, manifest, unmanifest. The Buddha called it desire. The desire, the movement. Combining the two statements, Maharaj, the love to be, with the Buddha, the cause of suffering is desire, clarifies the spanda, or the pulsation. The desire to be is the movement to be, and is prior to the formation of I, or a psychological subject. This desire, which is a movement to be, is the motor which drives the spanda, the pulsation. Metaphorically, if that motor stops, so does the perceptual illusion of being. This movement, from a point of view, is called desire to be, and it appears metaphorically as all vibrational samskaras thin out. The drive to seek and find permanence, or a permanent state, is an attempt to manage the fear of things disappearing, being destroyed or collapsing, being annihilated. As an aside, nirvana oftentimes means annihilation. This manifests as the fear that something will come out of nowhere and everything will disappear and be destroyed. The fear of death or disappearance resides within the force which desires to be, while the counterforce of dissolving being, or the desire to unbe, drives the motor of seeking a permanent state or a permanent state of non-dual perfection. Spanda is the pulsation from being to not or unbeing, and from unbeing to being. Since this pulsation is without beginning and without end, the only solution is to stay out of or not believe in the consciousness, emptiness, and awareness by appreciating the spanda as occurring within the dream as a perceptual, perpetual illusion. Maharaj called this never-ending, perpetual motion, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing. He called Mula Maya, the never-ending illusion. Calling this movement karma, or calling this movement desire, it's still a perpetual desire to be, desire to unbe, love to be, love to unbe, desire to manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest. This ongoing spanda, this ongoing perpetual motion. Love to be, love to unbe, desire to be, desire to unbe. This perpetual motion and motor, call it karma, call it Mula Maya, is the motor that runs the perpetual and perceptual illusion. To go beyond or to realize what appears through this be, unbe, manifest, unmanifest, ongoing Mula Maya, Maharaj suggested to notice the place, of course in quotes, to notice the place where being, before it becomes unbeing, where unbeing becomes being. In other words, there's a subtle, in quotes, space or place where being, space, unbeing, space, being, space, unbeing, space, being, space, unbeing, space. That space between being, where being becomes non-being, this place or space where non-being becomes being, piercing through and having that realization is beyond spanda, into the absolute nothingness. So this impersonal movement, whether we call it karma, or from another position we label it desire, which usually has a negative connotation, is just a movement from being to unbeing, unbeing to being. So metaphorically, this desire to be, the desire to unbe, the love to be, Maharaj would say, the love to unbe, is the motion or movement which Maharaj called stirring, which is called karma. Question: how would you define awakening and the awakening process, and what does it mean to be awakened? To best appreciate it, recall the last few questions. In other words, spanda. Spanda means the pulsation or throb. Again, what does that mean? It means manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing. This never-ending movement or pulsation, Maharaj called movement karma. Karma means movement, this pulsation. Desire is desire. It can be translated as movement. So this ongoing movement and pulsation from being, unbeing, being, unbeing, being, unbeing. In fact, Maharaj said so brilliantly, find the space where being, before it becomes unbeing. Find the space where before being, here's being, becomes unbeing. being, unbeing. Find that space which will, in quotes, move you prior to or beyond the spanda or the movement or the pulsation. Now, the important thing is you don't want to get into this movement or pulsation. So, for example, if you're most spirituality, so many religions, so many cosmologies have the mythology. Now, when you say mythology, the operative word is myth, which means that you transcend, you descend and disappear. I appear, I disappear. I integrate, I disintegrate and disappear. Integration, disintegration. Integration, disintegration. This ongoing pulsation. If you fall for or get seduced into that something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing, form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness. In quotes, subjectively, we can experience this as a spiritual identity that expands. You take a workshop, a satsang, you meditate, and then all of a sudden the movement contracts. There's an expansion identity, a contraction. The identity expands and contracts, expands and contracts, expands and contracts, transcends, descends, transcends, descends, integration, disintegration, manifest, unmanifest, expansion, contraction. Why is that so critical? That movement, karma or desire, takes place on a vibrational level. You, in quotes, cannot stop it. You immediately go into expansion, contraction. Whether you go into a meditation expansion, then you go into a contraction. All of a sudden, you're back into expansion, contraction. Now, most people take the awakening process as expansion, as if the I or identity will continue to expand and transcend. But as we all know, the phone rings, you get an email, you get the flu, you lose money in the stock market, whatever it might be, and all of a sudden you are no longer expanded, you're contracted. You're expansion and contraction. And that never-ending process is the spanda, which you don't want, in quotes, to get involved with. Now, what's awakening? Awakening to me is not the identity of expansion, a spiritual identity, and then contraction, expansion, maybe I'll expand forever, be permanent. Awakening is when you realize who I am, who you are, is prior to the expansion, contraction process. This expansion, contraction process, this manifest, unmanifest, this transcending identity, descending identity, the archetype, very subtle archetype, I transcend, and then I come back to save the earth and to give teachings or whatever it is. Expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. Awakening is when you pop out of expansion, contraction, and you realize you're not the expansion, contraction. Expansion, contraction can continue, but it has zero, absolutely nothing to do with who I am. When you, in quotes, fall into expansion, contraction, then you fall into what Alan Watts says, that in most spiritual circles, people, there's up and there's down. There's up and down. Most people in spiritual circles want to live in an up universe. They don't realize there's a down universe. For every up, there's a down, for an expansion, a contraction. Manifest, unmanifest. This is the trap of integration. Integration, I lose my integration. Integration, lose my integration. Such a common question that comes up is there such a thing as being done? In or from the point of view of the identity or the spiritual identity that's in this expansion and contraction, the answer is you will never get done, because in that identity, there's always expansion, contraction. The awakening process, when you pop out of expansion, contraction, when you pop out of, in quotes, pop out of expansion, contraction, that's really the awakening process. Now, of course, you'll pop out of it, then you'll go back into it, you pop out of it, you go back into it, etc. But that movement, that karma, that desire continues to continue. Spanda, the primal pulsation or throb, something, nothing, something, nothing, something, nothing, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest. The spanda, the primal pulsation or throb, clarifies three frequently asked questions regarding integration, what is being, and is there such a thing as being done? All of these experiences, perceptions, and concepts appear and disappear as pairs of opposites contained and revealed within the spanda, the primal pulsation or throb. Being, unbeing, being, unbeing, being, unbeing. I am not integrated, I must get integrated. I am not integrated, I must get integrated. I am not integrated, I must get integrated. I am not done, I must get done or finished. I am not done, I must get done or finished. I am not done, I must get done or finished. I am not complete, I must get completed. I am not complete, I must get completed. I am not complete, I must get completed. The spanda, the subtle throb or pulsation, which is without beginning and without end, both reveals and conceals the illusion of being. The Absolute is prior to this movement, karma or desire. The Absolute is beyond or without the interaction of the pairs of opposites. The Absolute is beyond or without the interactions of the pairs of opposites. The Absolute is beyond or without the interaction of the pairs of opposites. The Absolute is beyond or without the illusion of being. The Absolute is beyond or without the illusion of being. The Absolute is beyond or without the illusion of being. The Absolute is prior to or without the primal movement called spanda. The Absolute is prior to or without this primal pulsation or throb called spanda. To be awakened, and the Buddha means the awakened one, means that I am no longer a part of that expansion and contraction process. I am no longer a part of the archetypical metaphor, the mythology of, and every culture has it, of expansion, then I'll come back and descend into and integrate. I'm no longer a part of that. Oh, the awakened one, or being awakened, is all of a sudden, I'm not part of that expansion contraction. As Maharaj said, there is no movement in the state of Parabrahman. I'm no longer a part of that expansion contraction, integration, disintegration, appearing, disappearing. Who I am is prior to that, beyond the throb, beyond the expansion contraction. Expansion, contraction. Again, if you look into your experience, you'll meditate, you'll do spiritual practice, you'll have an expansion, and shortly thereafter, contraction. All this occurs because that's part of the process. So awakening is when you start popping out of the expansion, contraction process. To be awakened means you get that that's not you. The awakening process is getting beyond or prior to expansion, contraction, the identity of expansion, the identity of contraction. To be awakened means I get that this has nothing whatsoever to do with me. There is no longer any movement, karma, desires, movement. That pulsation is no longer. And I always felt that Nagarjuna in Madhyamika Buddhism summarized it best with his 8 negations. There is no arising, there is no subsiding, there is no coming, there is no going, there is no differences, there are no similarities, there is no duality, there is no non-duality. You could say there is no something, there is no nothing. No coming and no going. So to be fully awakened means there's no longer any movement, karma, no longer any desires. Desires meaning movement, not personal desires. Desires meaning movement. And again, there is no karma movement in the state of Parabrahman. A thorn to remove a thorn. There is no state of Parabrahman. A thorn to remove a thorn. All pointers point to what is not Nisargadatta Maharaj as the Absolute. There is no Absolute. Paradoxically, Lord Krishna, I am in every being. I am not in any being. Lord Buddha, no being has ever entered nirvana. Consciousness and awareness are phenomenological appearances. We could call consciousness and awareness very subtle veils, states, or vibrations which appear and disappear. The Absolute is beyond or without consciousness, vibrations, or awareness. Question: in the book You Are Not, Beyond the Three Veils of Consciousness, you talk about consciousness awareness and the traps of consciousness awareness. Consciousness and the state of consciousness and the state of awareness are both vibrations. They're both vibrational frequencies. They're veils. They're states of consciousness. In the spanda, in the pulsation, something, nothing, consciousness and awareness appear. Consciousness and awareness disappear. Consciousness and awareness appear. Consciousness and awareness disappear. That is why they are a trap. If you start to believe in the concept of consciousness, or if you try to nest in the state of awareness, then you're going to be subject to consciousness awareness appearing, consciousness awareness disappearing, consciousness awareness appearing, consciousness awareness disappearing. Therefore, consciousness and awareness are very, very, very subtle traps and states or stations that you do not want to nest in. To be fully awakened, which again is extremely rare, is to be prior to the movement, prior to the spanda, prior to the pulsation. Now, one thing that's really important, there's only 4 major texts in Kashmir Shaivism. One of those major texts is called the Spandakarakas. Spanda, pulsation or throb. Karakas means lessons. So you could say it means lessons in the pulsation. There's one sentence in the book that deconstructs the spanda. And that one sentence is that the appearance and disappearance, they call it nimesha and umesha, the appearance and disappearance, expansion, contraction, both of them happen simultaneously. Because they both happen simultaneously, they disappear. In other words, when you realize that appearance and disappearance, expansion and contraction, happen simultaneously or just at the same time, it disappears. And in that book, in that one sentence, Lessons in the Pulsation or Throb, it deconstructs the spanda or the movement itself. Again, awakened means there is no movement, karma, desires, movement. In the Absolute, there is no movement. And again, as Nagarjuna said, nothing arises, nothing subsides. Nothing comes, nothing goes. There is no duality. There is no non-duality. The dream, Nisargadatta Maharaj. See it all as a dream and have done with it. Nothing comes from nothing. There is no nothing. There is no something. Spirituality takes place in the dream only. There is no spirituality outside of the dream. Spirituality is part of the spanda, part of the movement, part of the mirage. Nothing comes from nothing. The Absolute is without awareness, consciousness, and states. Consciousness and awareness are phenomena. The Absolute has no awareness. The Absolute has no consciousness. Consciousness and awareness are the carriers of the dream illusion. Nisargadatta Maharaj, the Absolute is prior to consciousness. All that is heard, or that has just been read or heard, is non-existent. Shankara, nothing comes from nothing.